Great sport parents understand the stages of development we all go through as human beings, juxtaposed against the stages of development that all successful athletes go through. So you got to kind of be able to look at your child's development on the whole as a human being, and then how athletes are created, and then sort of be able to move back and forth and maximize both processes so you get the results you want in terms of maximizing your child's development. According to psychologist Dr. Morris Massey, there are three basic developmental periods for human beings. The first period is from birth to age 7, and it's called the imprint period. During this phase, we're like sponges, absorbing everything around us without judgment and accepting everything we're told and exposed to as true, especially when it comes from our parents. The child thrives on unconditional love, emotional stability, and attention and feedback from parents in this important developmental phase. The second period is called the modeling period, and it's between the ages of 8 and 13. During this phase, we copy people, including our parents, but also other people. Rather than blind acceptance, we start to experiment and try on roles and behaviors like suits of clothes to see how they feel and how people respond. Great coaches who have clear values and understand the physical and psychosocial development can have a very positive influence on young athletes during this period because, again, it's the modeling period. They're looking for role models. Great sport parents can as well, especially if they understand how to give effective, relationship-enhancing, positive feedback during this period, and they lead by example so they don't undermine their own credibility. In other words, so they're a great sport parent, a great guide. They've got knowledge and vision, and they've got this perspective where they care about the child and the child's development. They're not always reactive. So the third phase is called the socialization period. Between ages 13 and 21, we're largely influenced by our peers. The average teen spends 60 hours a week surrounded by peers and only 16 hours a week surrounded by adults. So ideally in this phase, your child has a solid peer group with good values and long-term goals and healthy lifestyles. We've all heard stories of good kids falling into the wrong crowd at this important and risky developmental period. Because again, remember, we discussed it earlier, the prefrontal cortex, not developed, right? Not developed until 21. So that whole judgment part, not there. After these three important developmental periods, change is very hard for human beings. We've developed habitual patterns of thought and patterned emotional responses and wrapped them in myelin, even though these mental habits could be based on a flawed explanatory style, which we'll get into later, which is how you explain the world to yourself, that we use to interpret the world we grew up in. So, basically your truth is similar to your development truth, even though it may not be true. In addition, even though learning can occur later in life, many of our brain's hypergrowth development windows have passed, and dendrites that were not used for learning were eliminated or repurposed. Dr. Massey summed up the growth experience by stating that after the age of 21, change generally occurs after what he calls a SEE, or significant emotional event like divorce, addiction, bankruptcy, or health crisis like a heart attack or cancer or something. So, it's development occurs early, and it's occurring during this development period, this sport adventure you're on. And so you got to understand, early on, kids just a sponge, right? And they're sucking everything in before the age of 7. So you want to have them in a great home environment, right? The second phase, again, the modeling phase. So you're really looking for positive role models, coaches, teachers, one of which you could be, right? And then that third period is a socialization period. So hopefully you have your kid in an effective peer group while they go through that sort of risky phase. So now to overlap those three development phases with the three development phases that successful athletes go through, which were first identified in the 1980s by Dr. Benjamin Bloom and verified by many academic studies ever since. It's like he did the Hallmark study, and then the same thing keeps showing up. The first phase athletes go through is called the ignition phase, and in this phase, the little athlete first falls in love with the sport. This phase is key for long-term motivation, so it can't be skipped. The phase is characterized by a fun, nurturing, interested coach or parent who's a great communicator and just has a knack for engaging kids. When Bloom studied the ignition coaches of highly successful athletes, musicians, scientists, and mathematicians, he cited that the first coaches weren't technical experts, but they were great at relating with the kids, and they were great listeners, and they were attentive and interested in the whole child, and they gave a lot of personal feedback through the entire learning session. The second phase Bloom identified is called the precision phase, and it's characterized by the excellent explanation, demonstration, and correction of hard, precise technical skills, so that a strong fundamental base is created. Future performance stems directly from effective coaching in the precision phase. Again, because you're wrapping myelin around this stuff, and if you don't have a strong fundamental base and take advantage of those early development windows we talked about early, those mental development windows we talked about earlier, then you got no chance. The third and final phase is called the deliberate practice phase, and it's characterized by long periods of consistent hard work, and you're always attempting to do work that's difficult, just outside your comfort zone. You're practicing to improve. You're concentrating, you're working. It's not always fun. In fact, a lot of times it's not fun. The daily goal is improvement. Dr. Anders Ericsson is best known for his analysis of this phase, and we discussed his work earlier. He identified that all masters of complex skills, including team sport athletes like hockey and football and basketball players and soccer players, they all require at least 10 years and at least 10,000 hours of deliberate practice to become excellent at their work. There are no shortcuts. If any of these phases are missed, the athlete cannot succeed. The ignition phase is necessary to carry the athlete through the trials of the deliberate practice years. The precision phase is necessary because while the human brain is great at building skills and wrapping them in myelin, it's generally terrible at unbuilding bad skills. We talked about earlier, there can be a slight erosion in those habitual skills just from lack of practice, right? Your timing can go off a little or that sort of thing. There's erosion as you age. And so for an athlete, you start aging in a negative way once you leave your late 20s, right? So that myelin starts to crack and erode a little bit. But, as far as unwrapping a bad habit or a bad skill or, in terms of getting rid of it, unless you have a disease like MS or Huntington's or Alzheimer's, myelin will never completely unwrap. It's there. And because it doesn't unwrap easily, it's very hard to correct poor hard skill technique developed during the precision phase, especially in basic fundamental skills that were developed at the right time, like during the blossoming period in parts of the modular brain. So, if you did the right thing at the right time and you did lots of it and you did it wrong, you got bad technique for life. You're really going to struggle to improve. And you see that. You see that with skating and hockey or proper throwing mechanics in football. Tim Tebow is a great college quarterback who got away with being a phenomenal NCAA quarterback and winning the Heisman Trophy for the best college player and all that, even though he had poor throwing mechanics, because he was a great athlete and a great leader. But, he couldn't play in the NFL. You can't play unless you can throw. And if you've learned poor mechanics during the precision period, then you can't fix them. It's just too much of an uphill struggle. So now he's a commentator. So that's how important those periods are. You have to get quality technical instruction for your kid long before you know how much long-term upside there has, because you have no idea during the precision period how good your kid's going to be. No one, and then the deliberate practice phase is a tough grind. So unless your kid was ignited during the early years of the sport and loves it, they're never going to work hard enough to be great. Because that's where motivation starts, in that in that ignition phase. So there's no skill development shortcuts. You put the time and effort in, or you lose ground to someone else who's putting the time and effort in, and there's not much room at the top. So you got to hit every phase.